Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another session on ASPICE for cybersecurity. Alex, today we are going to talk about yet another process on ASPICE for cybersecurity. So, which is SEC.1, cybersecurity requirement elicitation. So, I have a standard in front of me to see what is the purpose. I'm just reading what is there in the standard, what is written in the standard. The purpose of the cybersecurity requirement elicitation process is to derive cybersecurity goals and requirements from the outcomes of risk management and ensure consistency between the risk management, cybersecurity goals, and cybersecurity requirements. Yeah, whenever we talk about risk management, mostly when it comes to cybersecurity, especially automotive cybersecurity, TARA comes into our mind, right? Threat analysis and risk assessment. So it seems like it is more about linking, where the process starts from TARA. From there, you derive the cybersecurity goals or the cybersecurity requirements, and that process is continued to the lower abstraction levels. So here we have 4 base practices. I would only name the base practices. I wouldn't go into the details of it, which we will anyways go through as we jump into the discussion. So the first base practice is to derive the cybersecurity goals and requirements. The second base practice is to establish the bidirectional traceability. And the third one is to ensure consistency. And the last one is communicate agreed cybersecurity requirements. Seems like pretty simple and straightforward. However, it isn't, because in the last or in our earlier videos, we have also discussed that today the cybersecurity standard is not well elaborated. Yeah, it talks about the context in brief, but when it comes to the implementation, we have to think about different abstraction level, or just spreading the topic or spreading the let's say uh, these base practices across different abstraction levels and how to apply there. So I think with that, we can start this particular discussion about SEC.1.
Okay, so I have a question regarding the objective of the SEC1 process. So
Mhm.
we see that when we describe the process in any of the project first section, we keep it as objective of that particular process. So during the assessment, the assessor, uh, is it necessary that the purpose mentioned in the standard or guideline uh, should be the same, or it's depend on the project, they can tailor it? What would be the right way, or what is expected in assessment?
Mhm. Okay, the question is about what is the purpose of this particular process, SEC1, cybersecurity requirement elicitation, and also if at all an organization is, let's say, describing their organizational standard process, then how do they need to describe the objectives? Will it be same or will it be different,
Hmm.
or uh, should there be any, tailoring? Okay, it's a broad question in my opinion. The reason being, if you look at the particular standard, the purpose is very clear. So it should act like guideline for us to go through the let's say risk management. From there, the stakeholders who are responsible for that particular abstraction level will derive cybersecurity goals or cybersecurity requirements. Now the question is, who are the stakeholders responsible at what level? Because normally, if you look at the automotive uh, development levels, then normally we start at the vehicle level. Then from there we go into the item. From there we go to the system. From there onwards, based on what that system consists of, whether it's the hardware, software, mechanical, we derive down to the lower levels. Similarly, the verification or the validation activities will continue on the right side. Now, when I talk about the risk management, this is also one of the questions we normally come across, because if at all we are doing a TARA, for example, threat analysis and risk assessment, normally there is a confusion who should do it and what should be the context of this TARA. Because if at all we are, let's say, system supplier who, as a tier one, who is supplying something to the OEM, then normally the scope of our risk assessment is in the scope of that particular system we are developing. So our boundary is just that particular system. On the other hand, the Tara can also be done at the item level or above, which is normally the work of the OEMs. And what do they derive out of it is the cybersecurity goals. So this is where we also have to make a clear distinction between cybersecurity goals and cybersecurity requirements, because more often we see that engineers, or especially cybersecurity engineers, do not really understand to segregate when to use the term cybersecurity goals and when to use the word cybersecurity requirements. So this is where cybersecurity goals are nothing but the cybersecurity requirements at the vehicle level, or at least the item level, not below. Because once we come down to the below level, such as system level, there the cybersecurity requirements are called so. We don't use the word cybersecurity goals. We directly call system level cybersecurity requirements. In the lower level, software level cybersecurity requirements, or hardware cybersecurity requirements, and so on and so forth. So this is one thing where there is a bit of a confusion. We use the word interchangeably between the system and the other levels. One thing. And the other one which I also wanted to measure, talk about is, where do we do Tara? Because if you go through the standard, maybe their Tara is described once. However, we have to understand that if at all, there are different stakeholders, which is normally the case, because we will have OEM, which is taking care of the vehicle level and the item level. Then we have a system supplier, which is a tier one working on the system level. Then normally, if the system supplier has some suppliers in the lower level for the software or hardware, they are also working in the lower level, which means at the end of the day, the risk, assessment, or the right word, if I can use, in which is used in this particular process, risk management, which has to be done in each of these individual abstraction levels. Which means you do a Tara as an OEM at the vehicle level and the item level, and you derive, let's say, cybersecurity goals. You pass on that cybersecurity goals to the lower level, including maybe the item definition, which is an overview of the item, and that is being used to derive or perform the Tara at the system level. And what do you derive as a result? You derive the system cybersecurity specification. Maybe those relevant informations are passed on to the lower levels, and from there, you know, um, further activities are done. Maybe we can also do the Tara at the ECU level or the software level, and so on. It can even be derived to the lower levels. Now, coming back to your original question, and maybe I will then pass it on to Falgun or Ronak to add something. The process purpose is, of course, which is described in the standard. So normally, when an let's say organization tries to write down their own objective, when they want to write down this particular process as a part of the organization process landscape, in my opinion, the tailoring mostly comes into picture in identifying what is their let's say boundary. Because see, if at all I am a tier one system supplier, there is no way I need to derive a cybersecurity goals. So this is where, when I derive, or when I, let's say, describe the objective of this particular purpose, then normally I would say that cybersecurity goals and item definition are the inputs for me in this particular process, which has to come from my customer. And using that, I will do, let's say, I'll perform Tara in the system level, and I will derive the system level cybersecurity specifications or requirements. So this is where maybe I don't take all the things which are described in this process, because this process also talks about cybersecurity goals, because it's not really particular to an abstraction level. If at all I'm a software supplier, maybe I will only talk about what risk management activities I have to do, and what kind of a cybersecurity specification I have to derive in the scope of my work, like maybe software or a hardware and so on. Yeah, that's my opinion. Falcon or Ronak, feel free to add on.
Yeah, I agree with what Praveen mentioned. So the overall scope would be in terms of making sure that you have some risks in your product. This can be at the system level or software level. And from there, you try to derive how can you mitigate these risks, right? So this would be the main objective, where you have certain methods uh, to analyze this risk, reduce this risk, and make sure that they're either prevented or to an accepted level. And you derive those requirements and try to implement those requirements. So that would be the main objective for this particular process.
Just one point from my side, like for the question from Dharmesh. So he mentioned like, can we tailor or what we can modify it in the objective. So I mean, my overall understanding is, I mean, we has to be in the same line. What standard defines, we can slightly modify, like define our boundaries and so on. But we cannot change everything. Like we, of course, it is related to the cybersecurity requirement. At least it doesn't. It has to be in that line. I can't do something else, basically.
Exactly. Because if I have to give an example, see the purpose of this particular process is to derive cybersecurity goals and requirements. Yeah. If at all I'm a typical software house where I normally execute the projects on the software, then definitely when I tailor these particular process objectives, then normally I would say deriving the cybersecurity goals are not in scope for me. I will only derive cybersecurity requirements at the software level. Yeah. Or if I'm a system supplier, tier one, the same kind of tailoring applies. We don't derive the cybersecurity goals because we are not responsible in that particular abstraction level. This is something I will get as an input, but I will derive maybe system level cybersecurity requirements. So this is the thing, which means the standard says, I mean, the scope of the standard is very broad, and when I tailor or when I tailor my objectives, then I have to define clearly what is in scope for me and what is not in scope for me, which is very clear for the assessor. When they look at the objective, they know that, okay, this is the scope here. This particular stakeholder is not deriving any goals because they are not the vehicle manufacturer. Rather, they will take it as an input and derive cybersecurity requirements in that particular abstraction level.
Okay, understood. Thanks for giving all the input. So one more follow-up question on this. So you guys already explained about this. So if I understand correctly, this objective, then for SEC1 process to be realized, prerequisite here would be from the Tara. Is that the right understanding? Or it can be or cannot be Tara?
It depends. So the reason I would say it depends is because your SEC1 process talks about two set of artifacts. One is system artifact and the other one is software artifact. Now, in the current industry, there is a how I would call it. There is a rule. I wouldn't say it as a rule. That there is a I'm missing the word. So people tend to do Tara by, so you have the item definition. From there, you try to analyze all your threats. At the high level, you have the cybersecurity goals. And from the cybersecurity goals using your threats, you would derive your cybersecurity requirements. So if you do the Tara at system level, it becomes system security, cybersecurity requirements. If you do the Tara at the software level, it becomes a software cybersecurity requirements. Now, if you ask me as a prerequisite for SEC1, it is very difficult for saying that, okay, this exactly is a prerequisite. However, what I would still go ahead and then say is, in order to conduct your SEC1 process completely, I would say you would require customer requirements. You would require the item definition. And probably, yeah, these two would be the start, because SEC1 also talks about deriving cybersecurity goals from the threats that are there or from the risks that are there. So you will, in a way, you will start doing analysis and come up with some cybersecurity goals, out of which then you do a deeper analysis, probably at the level of Tara, and derive your security requirements at system or software level. Praveen, anything to add on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, that's what we were trying to address in our previous videos, right? Because what is your input purely depends on where you stand. Are you a system supplier? Are you a
Mm,
OEM? Or are you a software supplier or a hardware supplier, right? If I'm a system supplier, then what do? I do the system level Thara, as a result of which I derive maybe, system cybersecurity requirements. What are the inputs? Cybersecurity goals, which are coming from the item or the vehicle level, and item definition, which is normally coming from my customer. These are the inputs. But if you are a OEM, who is using this particular process, then of course your inputs are different, because there you're doing a TAR at the item level or at the vehicle level, and you are actually deriving the cybersecurity goals, right?
mm,
Similarly, if you're a software supplier, then the inputs are different. So this is where whoever is using and whoever is trying to understand what do I need to take as an input and what do I need to produce as an output, first need to identify where do they stand in this chain. Yeah, so that is something really, really important. I think once we understand that, we know who is above us and what are they responsible for, who is below us and what should we be giving them as an input. So I think that answers the question.
understood.
Okay,
Okay.
on that, I had
Mm,
maybe a question to Falgun, because viewers who are going to this particular video might be wondering by now, because we have used the term item quite a bit. So can you talk a bit about this particular term item? What is this? And if at all we are talking it as an abstraction level, where does it come? Can you talk a bit about this particular term item? What is this?
That's a very interesting question. So when we talk about the complete automotive industry, so the final product that we are aiming for is the vehicle, right? So we call the topmost level as, now I say topmost because I tend to always see the whole architecture in the top to bottom. So top down approach. So this is where I say this as top. So I keep my vehicle at the top. So anything below that, I will, in a hierarchical way, I will cut things down and then make into different smaller units. So you break vehicle. Vehicle is a product which consists of a lot of things, lot of functionalities, features, everything. So I break that down into multiple items. Now, what are these items? So these can probably domain specific items. Like for example, it can be a domain controller ECU. It can be a gateway ECU. It can be a transmission controller ECU. It can be anything, right? It can be one set of functionality. So this I would call as item. Now, why would I refer this as item? I'll come to this in a bit. So from item, I'm going to divide them into elements. So this is again as per the standard 2144 or 26262. Items can further be divided into many elements. Now these elements can be considered as system elements. Now system elements can further be subdivided as software elements, hardware elements, if applicable mechanical elements, etc. Then those software elements, so let us go in detail about the software part. So the software elements can be further subdivided into architectural components, then goes into the software units. So that software unit can further be divided into your function, which is your the smallest unit in your whole chain. So the same way when you are talking about hardware, so hardware elements can be further divided into hardware component into hardware unit into probably the ICs or the resistors or the capacitors, etc., which are the smallest part of units in the complete chain. So this is how the whole chain would look like. Uh, did I answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So which means, if I understand it right, if at all I'm somebody who is working in the system level, for example, then I always have to keep in mind that item is a one level above the system, where maybe my system alone or my system together with other systems which are coming from maybe other system suppliers together form an item, and multiple items then together form my complete vehicle at the vehicle level. So that is how I need to understand, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So that
One
said,
more
mhm,
point adding to this item itself. So what I understood for the cybersecurity perspective is item definition itself is vary from where you look. So OEM perspective, the item definition is different than the tier one or tier two supplier.
Mm, yes. So having said that, when we say
Mhm,
the definitions are different, I think we are not talking in a way that I will also have an item definition in the system level or the software level,
mhm,
right? Item
yeah.
definition is
Mhm,
only one, which is at the item level
mhm,
and which is more or less the responsibility of the you know stakeholder who is responsible for the item level. In most of the cases, it's the OEM. They are
mhm,
responsible for the vehicle level as well as the item level, and that is normally item definition is normally given as an input to the system level, right? So it comes only once
mhm,
in the complete hierarchy, but as you mentioned, if at all I am a software supplier,
mhm,
then I need to know that item definition is not in the system level, it's even above. If I'm
mhm,
a system supplier, then it's directly above item level, right? So in that way, it could be, bit far or
mhm,
closer to my abstraction level.
So maybe just to add on to that point, Dharmesh, the way you mentioned what item definition means for OEM can be different for tier one or tier two. I would rephrase the statement and change
mhm,
it as what each group takes from item definition will be different. Item definition is one, OEM
mhm,
takes something else from that. Tier one will take something else from that because they have to concentrate about the interfaces of the system that comes into picture. Tier two, who are just the software or hardware developers, they do still refer to item definition, but the information that they take will be very less or minimal.
mhm,
Or indirect to say, right?
Right.
Because they may not derive anything directly from the item because that's too high. All the relevant
mhm,
information from the items are already taken care in the system, and then the lower level at the software or hardware system is my input. So this is where I don't need to think too much about what is there in the item in most of the cases. Okay, I think we
okay.
can go on to the next one then.
Mhm. Uh, so my next question on the line of SEC1 process is when we see the standard ISO SA 21434, by doing or performing the activity of SEC1, which chapter or where do we map in the standard of cybersecurity ISO 21434?
Mm, okay, I think that's also a good question because, in my opinion, there is no direct mapping. Maybe looking at some of the
Mm,
activities which are described in the SEC1, I can map into relevant sections in the ISO SAE 21434. So I don't remember the exact section names or the numbers, but I can give an high level mapping in this way. For example, the risk management, which are described as a part of the um, you know SEC1, this can be mapped to the last section in ISO SAE 21434, which talks about TARA, threat analysis and risk
mhm,
assessment. But
Section number
again, it
15.
section number 15. Thank you, Falgun. So, but again, it differs. If at all
mhm,
I'm talking about this kind of risk management in the vehicle level, then more or less I'm also talking about the concept level in ISO SA 21434. However, if I'm talking about the system or I don't know, software hardware level, maybe there is
mhm,
something below the concept. I don't know if there is something in the ISO SA 21434, or maybe not, or maybe there's only concept level. On the
mhm,
other hand, whenever I come to the requirement part, like deriving the cybersecurity goals or cybersecurity requirements, then once again I have to, you know, map it to that part of 21434, which talks about cybersecurity specifications or cybersecurity goals. So this is where it's more or less not a very clear one-to-one mapping. You need to have
mhm,
an understanding of both the horizon to say that okay, how these abstraction levels are there, how the activities are there, then based on that you have to find out a particular section in 21434 which talks only about that.
mhm.
Falgun.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
so
mainly to add on to
mm,
the exact numbers. So there is a concept phase in ISO 21434, which is part 9 or section
mhm,
9, which talks about concept. So there you talk about the cybersecurity goals. So this would be one section that probably would map. Then there is section number 10, where you talk about product development, which talks about the design, integration, and verification. So integration verification will not occur because this is still SEC 1. So the design part, maybe in some cases it might be applicable, but also not here. Jumping into the guns, SEC 2 might also be applicable here because it is design. Then moving on, there is section number 15, which is about the TARA, threat analysis and risk assessment. So definitely it is applicable over there. So this is where, as Praveen mentioned, there is no one-to-one mapping. There are multiple sections.
Okay, understood. Then my next question would be regarding when we look at the video guideline and ASPICE 3.1, we see the system engineering and software engineering process group. So where we can map, or at which level this SEC 1 process would be fitting.
Falgun, if you want to take this.
Yeah, I think we pretty much, in a way, we kind of covered in our last video, but I would still repeat this part because this is quite important. It's a good question too. So SEC 1 mainly talks about the software requirement, the cybersecurity requirement analysis. So this is where, if I'm talking about the system, I would put it as SIS 1 and SIS 2. SIS 1 is about the requirement elicitation, and SIS 2 is about the requirement analysis. So these two would be the place where this would map to if you're doing at the system level. And if you're doing at the software level, SW1 is something that you would definitely look into for the software requirement analysis for software cybersecurity requirement definition as well.
So that said, one note, even though the mapping was correct, SIS1 is not in the VDA scope. So you have to be careful. Sometimes I know certain organizations which have still described, even though it is not in the VDA scope, because that will give them some kind of a process in place to analyze the requirement coming from the customer. But from the understanding in the VDA world is that this particular analysis is not meant for the suppliers. So it is meant for the customer themselves to derive or come up with their requirements. So that's why they kept it outside the VDA scope. So, I mean, just as a side note, that SIS1 is not in the VDA scope.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the follow-up question would be, we have system and software requirement specification as outcome of this process. What about the hardware? What would be the intention? They have not mentioned hardware specification here.
Okay, I think this is again a very good question, because I think we also pondered a lot about this particular topic, because when we built our software car security, which is automotive cybersecurity landscape tool, we also had these questions, because whenever we are deriving the cybersecurity requirement from the system level to the lower level, I cannot say that all the requirements are taken care by the software cybersecurity requirements, which is not the case, because you also need certain requirements, or precisely cybersecurity requirements allocated also to the hardware as well. The reason why I believe the ASPICE for cybersecurity, or this particular SEC1, doesn't talk about the hardware specification is because hardware from the beginning was not a part of the ASPICE. So if you look at the ASPICE 3.1, which is kind of you can call it as a parent for this ASPICE for cybersecurity, it doesn't talk about anything about the hardware. So hardware specification doesn't come into picture at all. So that could be the only reason what I can think of, which is why it is not mentioned here. But if you think about the typical cybersecurity life cycle, then I believe that even there will also be cybersecurity, specifications at the hardware level that has to be captured as a part of the hardware specification document, maybe as a separate chapter or with some kind of attribute, so that we can clearly identify. Software cybersecurity specification will go into the software requirement document as a separate chapter maybe, and also the system level cybersecurity requirements will go into the system requirement.
Okay, fair enough. Maybe Riva, you have some question, then you can continue.
Yes. So in this sec 1, uh, it discusses regarding the specifying the functional and non-functional cybersecurity requirements for the cybersecurity goals. So could you throw some light on what this functional and non-functional requirements could be?
Okay, so I'll try to give my best to answer this. Then maybe Falgun can add on something. Because even before we talk about how do I derive functional and non-functional, cybersecurity specification from a cybersecurity goal, we need to understand what are functional requirement and what are non-functional requirement. Because with our experience working with different organization, automotive organization, there is a very different kind of an understanding of what is functional and what is non-functional. The one which is mostly used by the industry or mostly used by the organization is functional requirements are those which can be tested, which can be implemented and which can be tested. However, non-functional requirements are those which cannot be validated using a testing. Maybe you have to do a review. Maybe there is nothing to test in this kind of a requirement. Yeah, because it could be particularly about some kind of following some kind of a standard. Because if at all a requirement comes in the system level, where I write my system has to be developed according to the requirements or the guidelines given by ISO 21434 standard, then is it a functional or a non-functional requirement? It is more or less a non-functional requirement because there is nothing for me to implement here, which is implicitly taken care. Because when I do all the activities related to the cybersecurity at the system level, all the development activities, reviews, testing and all, then implicitly I am fulfilling it. And also with the different kind of methods, I can also show the evidence that I have fulfilled, maybe by clearing my cybersecurity audit, cybersecurity assessments. However, it cannot be tested. It is not a testable. On the other hand, when it comes to cybersecurity specification, there are certain requirements which can be implemented and which can be clearly tested in different level. Maybe it could be about implementing certain kind of a security, mechanism, security control, maybe cryptography or anything else, which are functional requirements which has to be clearly implemented with the help of some kind of a development or using some kind of a module from the third party software, third party provider, or maybe using some kind of a hardware modules and so on and so forth. And it can also be well tested to see whether that requirement has been met or not. So this is where cybersecurity goals will definitely come from the OEM. Along with that, item definition will come at the system level. I'll perform a TARA, as a result of which I'll identify the threat. Then I will see what should be my cybersecurity requirements at the system level to overcome that. Then I think about how do I fulfill my cybersecurity requirements using which cybersecurity controls, for example. So this is what lead to the functional requirements. However, in this process, there could also be some non-functional requirements which cannot be implemented and explicitly tested. So, which means from this particular standard perspective, I always have to keep both the things in mind, because more of a time we as a technical people always think about functional requirement, but we don't really concentrate much on the non-functional requirement. So that is what is been asked in this particular standard. Falcon, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put in the difference between functional and non-functional requirements. So one thing probably to add on is it is important for the organization to define what their functional and non-functional requirement is. And from there, it would make sense for their engineers who are working on the requirements or the development or the testers to classify them as functional and non-functional. By definition, when you talk about non-functional requirements, these are requirements which are important, which without which you cannot fulfill the complete product. However, these cannot be like you can sit and code, or you can sit and model, or you can sit and design something. So these are the non-functional requirements. It can be anything. It can be that you must follow your product must comply to ISO 21434 security standard. That is a non-functional requirement. Without this, of course, you cannot go ahead and then do your security analysis. But if you miss, and if you have this, how do you test this? For testing, you need a separate set of things. So for that, you would need functional requirements, which are implementable and testable. So this is how you differentiate between functional and non-functional requirements.
Yeah, I think because there were also some examples where I really felt in the past conversation with some of the experts that they don't clearly understand the difference between the functional and non-functional. For example, let's imagine that in order to implement the cybersecurity features, I need to buy a cybersecurity module from an external vendor. I need to use it. Okay, maybe let's imagine that it is called cybersecurity module version number 2. This is something I have to use, integrate in my particular implementation. Now, when I write a requirement or a cybersecurity specification in the software level, that software shall use cybersecurity component version 2.0. This is my requirement. And the question is it a functional requirement or a non-functional requirement? And people get confused thinking that it is a functional requirement. In my opinion, it is not a functional requirement, because can you test this particular requirement? You cannot test, but you can review it and verify it, whether I'm using that particular component or am I using that particular version or not. But you can test the requirements related to that particular module. Maybe if it does certain things, I don't know, it takes certain inputs, and maybe it does certain cybersecurity related functionalities and gives certain output. This you can test. That is your functional requirement. So more or less, in many of the cases, project teams get into trouble by not clearly segregating what is functional and what is non-functional, and they try to test everything, and they don't know how to test it, and or sometimes they'll make it more complicated than what is required, and they struggle. That is one thing. And in other cases, project teams also struggle a lot with identifying what level of a requirement has to be derived in which particular abstraction level. Because you are in the system level, and if you are deriving such a detailed requirement which has to actually go to the software specification, then you are actually adding too much of complexity in the system level, point number one. And also, you can't derive anything further in the lower level because you have already derived in such a detailed level in the system level. So I think this is the two things where project teams have to be much more careful to in which level I need to derive the requirements in for what abstraction level, and what is functional and what is non-functional, and how do I clearly segregate, and also how would I clearly segregate the verification activities for functional and non-functional requirement. Because there were also some discussions I did past in some of the other projects where there were certain requirements like this particular module has to use this ARXML schema version, I don't know, 3.0, and somebody was claiming this is a functional requirement. It seems like a functional requirement because there's a word ARXML, there's a schema, etc., but it isn't, right? Do you test it to verify that requirement? You don't test it, but you can review and verify whether you are using that exact schema template or not. So something like this. So this is where there has to be a bit more clarity on what is functional and what is non-functional. It makes the life easier for everybody.
Okay. Then my next question is, throughout the discussion, we heard a lot about the cybersecurity goals and cybersecurity requirements. So how can the consistency between these two be ensured?
Falguni, you want to take it?
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing to understand is when do we use what terminology? So when you're talking about cybersecurity goal, this is something that is referred at the vehicle level, which is typically at the OEM. So they are the ones who are going to create. So let me break this down for you. So if the OEMs create some cybersecurity requirements for the vehicle, it is called as cybersecurity goals. If the system engineers create cybersecurity requirements at the system level, it is called as system cybersecurity requirements. If the software engineers define cybersecurity requirements at the software level. It is called as software cybersecurity requirements. So these are the terminologies. So it is important that where we use what terminology is critical. Now, to answer your question, how do we maintain consistency? Now, ensuring consistency is one of the base practices in SEC1 as well. Right? So, what exactly does it mean by ensure consistency? Requirement elicitation is again a top down approach. So, you take the requirement from the top level, you break it down. What is the most important thing you need to focus when you're breaking it down? The most important thing is you don't miss out some things, because when you're breaking things down, you might tend to miss some keywords which can itself become a requirement. So this is where, when we are talking about consistency, let's say there is a cybersecurity goal which talks about one of the features. When you break it down, use the similar words, use the similar sentence structure, use the similar requirement phrasing statements, so that the original meaning of the requirement at the vehicle level is carried all the way to the unit level, so that you don't miss out anything. So this is meant by ensuring consistency. And this is what needs to be done when we are doing the requirement elicitation from the vehicle level to the unit level. Ravin, anything to add on?
Yeah, I think that's a very right understanding about how do we derive a particular requirement from the top to the lower. Just to add another perspective to it, yeah, if at all somebody is assessing, yeah, somebody has to verify that whether the consistency has been maintained or not. What do they need to check? There are a couple of ways the project teams can ensure the consistency. One is the most easiest one, but also mostly misused activity is traceability, where project teams think if I have a 100% bidirectional traceability between cybersecurity goals to the cybersecurity requirements at the system level to the cybersecurity requirements in the software or the hardware, then I'm ensuring the consistency. That is one part of the consistency, which tells that if there are 10 cybersecurity goals at the vehicle level, they have been traced to maybe 50 cybersecurity specifications at the system level. They have been once again traced to all the cybersecurity specification in the lower level. That is one way to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Yeah, there is a linkage, which means I've always considered the top level and derived something at the lower level. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that you have derived the correct cybersecurity specification, because it may also mean that the cybersecurity goals at the vehicle level, let's say cybersecurity goal 1 talks about one certain part of cybersecurity, but whatever you have derived in the system level talks something else, which is not consistent at all with respect to what it has to capture as an information from there. Yeah, because in order to fulfill something at the vehicle level, at the system level, I need to do something which supports that, right? If the top level vehicle cybersecurity goal is talking about, let's say, crypto, and in the system level, I'm talking about another part, another cybersecurity aspect, which is nothing to do with crypto at all, then even though there is a traceability between these two, are they consistent? They are not consistent. So this is where one is definitely we have to make sure that there is 100% bidirectional traceability between different abstraction level, whichever is in our scope. And the second thing is also to make sure that during the formal reviews, because of course, whenever we derive these cybersecurity requirements, we will do a formal review, we use some checklist, and we take some random examples of this requirement to see if they have been correctly derived from the higher level cybersecurity specification or cybersecurity goals. So this also has to be checked during the formal review. So these are the two ways where you can make sure that whatever you have derived at your level is consistent to whatever is given as an input at the higher level, or to make sure that whatever your suppliers have derived in the lower level is consistent to what you have given them as an input. So traceability is one, and the second thing is doing some formal reviews to check whether if the specification or the cybersecurity specifications are correctly derived, which actually addresses what is given as an input.
I think hearing your answer, that's the reason why I think in 4.0, SPICE 4.0, I see now the base practice, which was one base practice in 3.1 traceability and consistency. But again, they are now going back to dividing these base practices. So one separate for traceability and one for the consistency.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. I
many
mean,
of the time we see this traceability
exactly. I
is
mean,
maintained but not consistency.
exactly. Yeah. I think it is kind of a misunderstood term where most of the times project teams think that, okay, if I have 100% traceability, I'm also ensuring the consistency. But these are slightly different. It is that one supports another, but they are not independently sufficient to say that I have 100% bidirectional traceability, then I have a good consistency. No, it doesn't mean that.